Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Rarely Typical, a podcast where I am talking about living with rare disease, finding hope, and living a life that is rarely typical. My name is Sherry Langan, and today I am in the house at Red Rocks Church, and we are hanging out with one of the worship pastors, Brinnae Keathley, and we are going to talk about the finding hope part of this podcast. I wanted to cover some of the things that I get that people ask me when they are asking me about how am I so joyful or hopeful dealing with this chronic illness and dealing with something that is like so heavy and so hard. And like, how did I see my way through diagnosis? I'm going to share a little bit of my story, and Brennae's going to share a little bit of her story, and then we will try and marry this worship and chronic illness. So I think that it's possible in the scope of mental health and finding joy in the hard times. What I turn to all the time is worship. And so I felt like this made sense. So, hey, Brennae.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm excited.
I hope you still feel like it makes sense at the end.
Yes, I think it does.
Yeah,
I do
it
think
does. It makes a lot of sense.
right?
Yeah.
So when I was in the hospital, one of the biggest moments for me was during diagnosis. I mostly was just sitting in this hospital room by myself. My husband was home with our twin babies, and it was really freaking hard because I was in Denver when we lived in Colorado Springs, and I just really didn't have anything to do besides wait on these tests to come back to figure out what was happening next. And I was praying and I was seeking answers from God as to what was happening and why it was happening. But I really didn't feel like I was getting any answers. And I think that when you're dealing with hardship, you expect an immediate answer, like why this is happening, right? And for me, I think one of the things I've always turned to is when the voices in my head are too loud. I always like my worship music where I can't hear the devil. So I turn it up as loud as possible, right?
Yeah.
And I just drown out all of those negative thoughts that I do feel like consume us, especially when you're in a moment that when you're in the hospital room and all you can hear is silence. And I really felt like God was really quiet. And worship was the only thing that helped me get out of my head and get me out of that hospital room while I was there. So now, even through all of the stuff that I've dealt with since diagnosis, getting a bad report after, having to change medications, having to change treatment, going through clinical trial, all of it has been moments of doubt, right? Lots of self-doubt, lots of doubt. Is this working? Is this divine plan that we're promised, right? And when I start feeling that doubt, I always get in my car and I drive and I turn my worship music on as loud as humanly possible. And I try to drown those thoughts out because I know that that's not true. So it gets really hard. And most of the questions I get are, how do you mentally ground yourself? And worship really grounds me.
Yeah. What are some of your fight songs?
Oh, I'm in Something Has to Break is probably
Yeah.
one of my top ones. And then I listen to Gyra right now. I'm really into the Too Good Not to Believe song by
Yeah.
Cody Carnes. That's like my freaking jam. Love that one. And then let's see, what else am I listening to? I listen to a lot of Maverick City. We talked about Good Plans. Love that one. We sing that one at church a lot. And then I just went to a Phil Wickham concert. I freaking love Phil
Oh,
Wickham.
yeah. OG.
Yeah. And Battle Belongs is obviously one of those hype myself up going into clinic,
Yeah.
driving to clinic and I'm like, I got this. We got this, right? So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so true. I think that's what's so beautiful about worship and the expression. The reason I think that we're called to do it and why it's like part of our design is it takes our eyes off of us and puts it on Jesus. And when you actually look at Jesus, like it's in First John, and maybe the first or second epistle he wrote, that when we look at Christ, we become more like him. And that's what I want. Like that's what I love. Like being in corporate worship settings is like when I look at Jesus, it actually forms me more into His likeness and in His image. That's a very peaceful way to move through life. But that's what we're trying to do. If God incarnate Christ in flesh is in earth, and He wants us to be his disciples, to be little Christs walking around. We look like him more whenever we are actually fixing our gaze on him, looking at him. And so I think that's to what you're saying. Like, that's a beautiful response. It's a designed response to look at him. Like, I can't do this. This doesn't make sense to me. This is outside of my control, outside of my bounds, like, outside of my experience, and not the experience that I want. And so, like, what do I turn to? What do I look at? And that, even just that turning and looking at him and giving him praise and glory and telling yourself the truth, telling your heart the truth, that does something to us. It does something to our heart on like a basic level. I think on that kind of deeply spiritual level where we're becoming more like Jesus, but also like what Paul says, it also takes captive every thought. It trains the mind on Christ and on truth and the reality that he's asking us to live into, because there's a reality that we see around us so often, but we're called to live into a counter reality that we don't always see, which is kingdom here and now. And music has that way of doing that, doesn't it? It's like the bread and butter of our lives, like singing and like expression in that way. That creativity is like, it's been an intrinsic part of humanity since like we're created with it. It's part of our design. And so to express ourselves that way, to use our voice, and I love doing that corporately as well, because when people sing together, you get to bolster the faith of the people around you by using your voice. And we get to borrow one another's faith doing that together. And even to the point of writing worship music and having offerings of music that we give back to the house and saying, like, here, like, this is what the Lord's done in my life, and I'm going to give this gift to the church, and now the church can use it as a whole to be reminded of the goodness of God. All of our journeys get to kind of wind and weave together when we sing together. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. I think worship really puts me in the room where people are always like, I feel God when I'm reading my Bible, or I feel God, in these certain moments. And for me, it's always been worship. Like, I feel like God meets me in my place when I am in my most vulnerable state of worship. There are a lot of times when I'm listening to a message or I'm sitting in the room and I like don't feel like God is really speaking to me, or I don't really feel like the Holy Spirit moving, right? Like that's what we want to feel. But I feel like when I'm in worship, no matter where I am, I feel like that's where God meets me
Yeah.
in this place.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great way to describe that. And a lot of people have that experience too. And I think it's just that music is that universal language. No matter what language you're actually speaking, whatever dialect you have or whatever preference you have, music is something that transcends the words that we say. And it is energizing content directly to our soul. If you read a lyric sheet of the songs that you're singing, you're probably just like, okay. But like when someone sings it, it does something totally different. And there's a reason for that. And I think that's why God asks us to sing.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like sometimes it's really hard for people to recall a Bible verse in the moment, but I feel like I'm always recalling lyrics. Like I can recall lyrics, I think, better than I can recall a lot of things. And I think that my memory really focuses on lyrics in almost any weird situation, right?
Yeah.
And so when I'm really feeling down, or like when I'm really feeling in my feelings, I reach for things that I remember about like God's promises. And a lot of those promises come out of songs.
Yeah, absolutely. As a songwriter, we talk about that a lot, because so often you don't remember the 3 points in your sermon that you heard that day, but you're going to walk home singing a lyric. And so the lyric better have been true.
Yeah.
Like it better have been well written. It better have been like actually entrenched in truth and something real and like what Christ has actually inspired, and not just because you were going for the rhyme or you thought it was a fun turn of phrase. But it's like, if you're going to put it in the mouths of God's people, because they're going to walk away with it. It's just that's a reality to sit with too, as you're like, okay, well, what kind of stuff am I listening to? You can feel whenever there was actual encounter behind the words that you're singing, rather than like, oh, they're just trying to be cute.
Yeah. Can you think of a time or a song that you wrote when you were in a really like hard place, and like writing the song or singing whatever song it was helped you feel like God was in the room with you?
Yeah, that's a great question. To be honest, a lot of those songs from me are really just songs between me and the Lord. I have a weird journey with him where I have songs that he'll deposit or that I'll write, and they'll mean so much in a moment, and then it's like they're held and kept back for just a private moment between he and I for years, and then all of a sudden they're brought forth and given to others. And it's cool to watch that happen, because it's like it's being preserved for the right moment, but my encounter and the reason that what it stemmed from something much earlier in my faith journey. But to watch it come into fruition later is beautiful. There's been a couple songs like that, and most of them are all kind of like born out of trauma or transition or some sort of suffering or pain or just some sort of disillusionment. That's been a lot of my story. But one, for example, my husband and I, in our early years in ministry, were asked to move overseas to plant a church. And then I have a college buddy that we had it took years to get him here. We got him here and we finally got him hired and was like, oh, we're so excited to work together. But the week that he moved here, we were moving to Belgium. And so he got in and then drove us to the airport and we're like, bye. But one of my favorite people to write with. And so we wrote a song and I was just like surrounded by our moving boxes. And it was a song about trust and that I don't understand what's going on. I don't see where I'm going. But then this kind of like bold invitation, but you can bring on whatever it is you're going to bring. And I know that you're going to anchor me, which felt dangerous at the time because I had literally no idea what we were stepping into. But I felt very like, I felt my dire need of the Lord in those moments. And we loved the song and we really believed in it. And nothing kind of happened with it for about 5 years. And then all of a sudden it got pulled out of like a Dropbox. And 5 years later, by that time, all of our yearly renewable visas had been expended and it was COVID and we were being asked to come home. And so I had spent that whole time abroad and they recorded it and I couldn't get home for the recording because the borders were locked down. And I was sitting I was sitting in our kitchen surrounded by moving boxes again. We were getting ready to move back to the States. And they sent me just like a video of them singing the song it was like maybe 3 records ago. And it was 5 years between the moment that we wrote it and the moment that it was actually heard. But like all that had transpired in that time and how much I had changed and how much I had learned to actually trust the Lord, the song wasn't released until I had gone through that. And that was an interesting experience for me. And that's happened a couple more times with other songs that I've loved that have meant a lot that were written in a time where they weren't ready to be heard and they needed to kind of percolate until he wanted to kind of bring them out for other people to hear. So that's been an interesting experience for me on the creative side where I feel like I'm getting songs, but they're held in secret until a moment and then I have no control over the moment.
Yeah.
And that's a nice place to be. I'd rather him decide than me push.
So before we moved to Colorado, Caleb and Kelsey released their like mashup album and their Oceans and You Make Me Brave song was like my freaking anthem. And then we had just had the boys and Jason came home and said, I think we need to move to Colorado. And I was like, no,
What?
The answer is no. We have twin babies and my parents live an hour away. We're not moving to Colorado. And I remember because that song was a song that I was listening to a lot, but it didn't speak to me until we were in this season of now I need to trust this, right? And it was like, you call me onto the waves, like you make me brave. And I was just like, I don't feel brave right now.
Yeah.
Right. And then we moved here. And then after H and I met, I was driving home and that song came on because it was on my playlist. And it was like, you call me onto the waves. No fear can hinder the promises that you made. And I just remember being like, I felt so much fear. And I felt like, wow, that song is really speaking to me now. And it's been on repeat for this whole year. Yeah. But like now it's actually speaking to me. Yeah. You know, it was cool.
Yeah, it's cool. I was like prepping you almost.
Yeah.
Kind of like laying the groundwork, little seeds. Yeah. Songs do that all the time. I feel like he uses songs as seeds. Kind of like spreading them and scattering them and they're taking deep root, but you don't know.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're in the moment and you're like, oh, I have something to stand on. You gave me articulation, you gave me verbiage, you gave me melody, and it's already kind of taken deep root in my heart. And I actually know this to be true about you, or I'm starting to believe it. And so I love that about music too. I feel like so many of us have that experience where it's like, I have my song or a song for a season. It's like, I know words doing that on purpose.
Yeah.
And he like scattered that seed long before that moment to get you there.
Yeah. When you asked about my battle songs, I feel like each of those songs has served a different purpose and a different season through this whole journey, right? Because now this is my 7th year. And so we didn't know if I was going to get 7 years when all of that started. And so we were trusting that we were called to Colorado, right? And then At the time, we thought we were being called to Colorado for Jason's job, but we were called to Colorado because
Yeah.
this is one of the best clinics for my rare disease.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
And so we were trusting that process. And each phase of my 7-year journey has had a different song that
Yeah.
walked me through each season. And so it's cool because God's given you guys words, right? But those words resonate in a different way for people in different seasons.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like songs are as diverse as the people that listen to them. Probably the reason that we wrote it or where it stemmed from in our life or in our journey is it's certainly not the same journey that you're in, like the same pilgrimage that you are on. And that's what's so beautiful about creativity. It doesn't have the same strict parameters as everything else. It's multivalent. It means different things to different people. It all stems from the same truth.
Yeah. It's always funny when I get those questions like, how are you so positive? How do you have so much joy? And a lot of the times I'm just like, well, I can't imagine going through this kind of diagnosis or any diagnosis in general, right? Cancer or some sort of autoimmune disease. I can't imagine going through something like that and not having faith to fall back on, not having promise to fall back on. And so when people ask me those questions, sometimes I wonder, do you have faith to fall back on? And one of my things, I always give them a Bible verse, or I try to give them a song that really spoke to me and hope that that's something that can get you through, because I can't get you through your mental journey when it comes to what you're dealing with. But I believe God can speak to you. Maybe I'm the vessel, or maybe the song is the vessel, or whatever in that situation, but it can't always be me, right? So when I answer the question, I try to, I don't know, guide them to somebody else who has words, because I don't always have words for it, you know?
Oh, and some words just kind of fall flat, and some though sometimes the things that we say or the things that we sing or the things that we write, it like hits home and you're like, oh, okay. I wouldn't have chose that one, but I guess that's what hit. And we're not in control of those things. But I think that's the power of our testimony. Just like what you're walking through and sharing what you're walking through and what has meant something to you. Even something like that. I think that's what we want so much from the people surrounding us. We just want someone who can speak some sort of sanity to our experience because they're also walking alongside of us. And even if it still feels crazy, like the communal aspect of creativity, in that we all experience something, we all have some sort of reaction or some sort of response to things, like creation around us, whether that be going outside and like looking at the mountains or listening to a beautiful song or writing a short story or whatever. Like all of that kind of, it just grabs us all in a very distinct way. Like I said, as diverse as the people who are experiencing it. But I think that's what's interesting to me about hardship and suffering. Like, I feel like so often we're looking for a way to pull ourselves out. But from like in me and my story, where I have felt drawn over the past probably 4 to 5 years, as I've been drawn further into the suffering, mostly because I feel like I've just had this revelation of Jesus as like the wounded victor, and how cherished I feel in my own suffering, knowing that we have a Christ who has suffered. And isn't that the most beautiful thing, that he is risen and he is victorious, and also he still bears his marks, he still bears the wounds. There's a song that's been getting me recently. It's a Stephanie Gretzinger song called Man of Sorrows. And it's not the song that you always want to sing, but it really speaks beautifully about our worship in this way. It talks about how our worship is like a balm to him. Because we love him so much, we get to pour out this offering of worship, and his heart is broken because not everyone has been restored to him, and not everyone knows of this full life that he has, that he has in store. And even though he's victorious, he still chooses to, like, he still sits in this brokenheartedness that not everyone has recognized the eternal significance of what he has done. But our worship is like a balm for a pain, and he experiences that. I think that's just such a prophetic articulation about what our worship does, and even like kind of recalling the story of Mary, and who just breaks open this like oil and this perfume and like and anoints Jesus and does this beautiful thing for him, and he's so touched and so moved. He's like, she's anointing me for burial. She's doing this intimate thing for me, and no one gets it, no one cherishes it, but he does. He sees the significance of it, and like says that anywhere that the gospel's preached, we're going to talk about this moment, because this is what worship is, that you wasted this costly thing and poured it out on me. And then he gets to go to the cross smelling like that perfume. And that's like a crazy image to me when I think about like, okay, what worship does, like what our worship does when we're singing our battle songs or when we're singing our quiet songs, when it's just instrumental and we're just like settling into that moment and letting our joy be restored and letting our joy be renewed and recognizing it's not stemming from our circumstance, it's stemming from the reality that we have camaraderie with the Christ who suffers and who knows our weakness and who knows our wounds. And that is the deepest kind of knowing that you can have, regardless of whether the situation changes. You know that you're deeply entrenched in this goodness, that you're held so firmly fast in this grace. And it doesn't ebb and flow based on a feeling or a diagnosis, or if this medication is working or if it's not working, or I'm feeling like I can claim healing today, or if I can't, I feel like I don't have the faith to claim the healing today. Like I get to, like, this route of suffering for me, like that has like produced such a hope in me, because I've just never felt closer to Jesus, because I think that's like where he's most misunderstood.
Yeah. And we're talking about worship like music, but like what you said with the perfume, worship can look like so many different things.
Oh, yes.
And so when I'm thinking about like worship, and it's not always music, it's like when woman touched Jesus's robe.
Yeah.
And he was like, because of your faith, you were healed. Right. And the disciples walked with him and they still questioned him, and he showed them grace, and they went as far as they could go, and they died for Jesus at one point, but they still doubted.
Yeah.
And so when people are asking, what if I feel far from God, or like I don't feel like God's in my situation, I just think of those stories, like the Israelites, right? They doubted God, and like they, walked for all these years and didn't see the promised land because they doubted after seeing the Red Sea parted. And there's so much grace that God gives you, and there's so many different ways to worship him. It's just a matter of looking around and looking at your circumstance. And in my situation, at the time, I didn't see it. I couldn't have seen it. I couldn't have seen that this story was so intricately written, that it was so beautiful in hindsight. But you have to get through it to see the hindsight, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't see
a lot of
hindsight.
mess in the middle. Yeah.
Yeah. And what our pastor says all the time is like, you can't see it when you're in it. And so like, I couldn't see all of this grace, right? But I was trying to worship the way I knew how in the midst of it, even though some of the time I just felt super defeated.
Yeah.
And in hindsight, I realized that like there was so much grace poured out over this story that had been written long before we ever got here.
Yeah.
But worship looks different for some people. So like if it's not music, it's, reading your Bible or spending quiet time, or, sitting in your car for an extra second just to say a prayer.
Yeah.
Worship doesn't have to necessarily be music, but that's
Doing everything is unto him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he loves
anything and everything. Yeah. No, that's beautiful. There's the people in scripture are so viscerally real, because they're so messed up and so broken. And even the people that we idolize and make heroes out of, like, are at one point or another, we're like total dirtbags, or just like really messed up. And so there's a lot of just camaraderie to be found in like the human experience. And we don't have to put this pressure on, like, it needs to look this certain way, or it needs to sound this certain way, or just the simple act of continuing to do so, continuing to worship even when you don't feel like it, continuing to bring an offering. That's why I loved the concept of pouring out oil, pouring out perfume, because it seemed like waste. Like no one saw any purpose to that. No one saw any like viability to that. Why would we do something like that? It meant so much to Jesus. It meant so much to him. And even like the little things that I'm bringing, and I don't know what this is doing. I just feel like I'm just doing it again. I'm just showing up again. Here's my simple presence again. And even that, it forms us and shapes us over the long haul, where we just keep building the muscle to praise, the muscle to worship.
Yes.
And it's kind of like going to the gym. You keep the practice going. And then like practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect, but we can never strive to be perfect. And so all the pressure is off. You just keep practicing and you become more like him. And it becomes more and more second nature to come back into his presence whenever you're bearing this weight of grief and suffering, and you just get to pour it out on his feet. And he knows exactly what to do with it, because he also has suffered and he also has grieved. And so, yeah, for me, in my own worship journey and how I've been like coming into God's presence, and like what music has been standing out to me and has meant the most to me. It's been that stuff that has reminded me of, oh, he suffers with me.
Yeah. I love that. I hope that this made sense to everybody. It really makes sense in my head when I'm thinking about it. I think worship was such a big part of my story because, I mean, I'm still obviously actively having a story
Yeah.
and still actively worshiping, but now my worship looks like music, and maybe it won't one day. But like right now, like my worship looks like music. I feel God in the midst of my hardship when I'm worshiping. And so I thought that this would be a really cool podcast. So I hope you guys got something out of it. Thanks, Brinnae,
Yeah,
for
thanks
hanging
for
out
asking
with me.
me.
I'm excited to let you guys hear this. If you liked this, please subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.